All right, so picture this. You're just starting your day. It's a Friday. You're having your coffee, and boom.
Oh, yeah.
Suddenly, the news just explodes with this crazy story that ties in tech and military strategy and the president all in one.
It's like all these different worlds are colliding, huh?
Exactly, and that's what we're diving into today.
Buckle up, right?
Yeah, so the big story here, the one that kind of set everything off, were these reports that Elon Musk, the one was expected at the Pentagon like he was going to be briefed on U.S. war plans with China.
Wow, that's pretty high stakes right there.
Oh, yeah, top secret stuff. And then almost as soon as this news breaks, we get these really strong denials from both the president himself and the Pentagon.
So you've got this back and forth, this he said, she said, right from the get-go.
Totally. And to make it even more interesting, this all happens while Musk is in charge of this government efficiency project.
Right, the Doge initiative.
Yeah, Doge. And on top of all that, there's a whole bunch of other major policy announcements that also dropped that same Friday.
So it's like a perfect storm of news, huh?
It really is. And we've got a ton of sources to sift through for this deep dive. News articles, summaries, explainer pieces, the whole works.
So what's the plan? What are we trying to figure out here?
Okay, so we're going deeper than just the headlines, right? We want to understand what actually happened with this supposed briefing, why it even matters if Musk was there or not, and what this whole thing tells us about how the administration is thinking and how they do things.
Yeah, like what's the bigger picture here?
Exactly. And there are some seriously interesting angles to this. We've got a hewing tech guy potentially being brought into discussions about military intelligence.
Yeah, that's unusual.
To say the least. And then you've got those really quick denials that just came flying out.
Right, like they wanted to quash that story immediately.
Yeah, and of course there's the whole question of how Musk's business interests, especially in China, might be playing into all of this.
Oh, absolutely. That's got to be a factor.
And then to top it off, there are some surprising connections to things like student loans, and even the name of a brand new fighter jet.
Okay, well, that's a lot to unpack.
It is, but I think it'll be a fascinating ride. So let's start with the heart of the story, the reports about this briefing, and then all the denials that came after.
Sounds good. So walk me through it. What did the New York Times and the Wall Street Journal actually say in their initial reports?
So according to them, the plan was that Elon Musk would be at the Pentagon sometime before 11:53 a.m. Eastern Time on that Friday.
Okay.
And he was supposed to be there for a briefing on the U.S.'s strategic plans for a potential conflict with China.
Oh, wow. So like literally war plans.
Yeah, like the real deal, super classified stuff.
And how did the administration react when these reports came out?
So almost right away, like minutes later, at 12:01 p.m., President Trump puts out this very strong denial.
What did he say?
He said, and I'm quoting here, "I don't want anybody seeing potential war with China. Elon has businesses in China."
So he's basically saying Musk can't be trusted with this information because of his ties to China.
Yep, and just a couple minutes later at 12:03 p.m., he calls the whole thing fake flat out.
Okay, so a very clear and very swift dismissal of the reports?
Absolutely no room for interpretation there.
But it wasn't just the president who was denying this, right? The Pentagon also pushed back pretty hard.
Oh yeah, big time. The chief Pentagon spokesman, Sean Parnell, called the New York Times article garbage and completely fake.
Wow, so they really wanted to shut that story down fast.
No doubt about it, but here's where things get a little complicated for you.
Okay, I'm listening.
So while this whole briefing about war plans with China is being denied, there's a confirmed meeting between Musk and a top defense official that same morning.
Wait, so there was a meeting, but it wasn't about the war plans?
Right, it was an 80-minute meeting between Elon Musk and Defense Secretary Pete Hegseth. It happened roughly between 11:53 a.m. and 1:13 p.m.
Okay, so right around the same time as the reports and denials were flying around?
Exactly.
So what was the administration's explanation for this meeting then, if it wasn't about war plans?
Their story is that this meeting was all about innovation, finding ways to make the Department of Defense more efficient.
Okay, so they're bringing in Musk, the tech innovator, the efficiency expert.
Yeah, and they're pointing to his leadership of this Doge initiative as the reason he was there.
Let's talk about that for a second. What exactly is a Doge and what is Musk's role?
All right, so Doge stands for the Department of Government Efficiency. It's a temporary thing that President Trump put together.
Uh-huh.
And basically their job is to audit different federal agencies to figure out where they're wasting money or resources, and then to eliminate those inefficiencies.
So it's like a government streamlining project.
Exactly, and Elon Musk is the guy in charge of it.
Interesting. So the administration is putting a lot of faith in Musk's ability to do this.
Oh yeah, President Trump has said publicly that he has unwavering trust in Musk for this job.
And are they claiming any success so far?
They're saying that Musk's work has already saved the government a bunch of money across various agencies.
Okay, so their whole narrative is that Musk's visit to the Pentagon was all about efficiency and innovation.
That's their story, and they're sticking to it, but there's a bit of a wrinkle here.
Okay, what is it?
President Trump himself expressed concerns about Elon Musk's business interests in China.
Right, I remember that from the initial denial.
Yeah, so on the one hand, they're trusting Musk to help make the government more efficient, which you'd think would give him access to some sensitive information.
Uh-huh.
But on the other hand, the president is worried about Musk's ties to China and how that could be a security risk.
That seems like a bit of a contradiction.
It does, right? So it makes you wonder how they're balancing these competing priorities, the desire for efficiency versus the need to protect national security, especially when it comes to China.
Yeah, like how do you square those two things?
It's a really good question, and it raises the issue of how much scrutiny they're applying when someone with such big international business dealings is brought into these discussions.
It definitely makes you think.
It does, and to make things even more interesting, this whole Musk situation went down on a day when the administration was making a bunch of other major policy announcements.
Oh, wow. So it was a busy day in the news cycle.
You could say that it was a super busy Friday. There was so much going on beyond the Musk story.
Okay, well, let's hear about it. Give me the rundown.
Yeah, so one of the biggest announcements was about the Education Department. President Trump said he's going to move the entire $1.6 trillion federal student loan portfolio from the Education Department over to the Small Business Administration.
Whoa, hold on. That's a huge change. What was the reasoning behind that?
So President Trump and an executive order he apparently signed the day before are saying that the Education Department isn't really equipped to handle things like loan servicing and collections, what they're calling bank functions. Their goal is to return bank functions to an entity equipped to serve America's students.
So they're saying the Small Business Administration is better suited for this.
Right, and this move is also part of a bigger plan to basically dismantle the Education Department as we know it.
Wow, that's a pretty significant restructuring of the government.
No kidding. And then there was another big announcement. President Trump unveiled the name for the next generation fighter jet.
Oh, yeah? What are they calling it?
It's going to be the F-47, and he made it very clear that the number 47 was clearly chosen to memorialize his presidency.
Well, that's certainly a direct way to put your stamp on a piece of military hardware.
No subtlety there, but here's an interesting detail for you. The company that won the bid to build the F-47 is Boeing.
Okay.
And Boeing has been having some problems lately with safety and production delays, including the new Air Force One, which President Trump has been very vocal about.
So the company that's supposed to build this commemorative fighter jet is kind of under fire for other performance issues.
Yeah, exactly. It adds a whole other layer to the story.
It does. So what else was happening on the international front? Any news there?
Yeah, there were a few things. First, there was a scheduled hearing to debate the legality of deporting Venezuelan immigrants using a wartime statute as the justification.
Oh, wow. So they're invoking wartime powers to deal with immigration.
That's what it looks like, which raises some big questions about legal and ethical boundaries.
For sure. And what about Canada? Any updates on that front?
So President Trump brought up the idea again of making Canada a U.S. state.
He's still on that.
Oh, yeah. He seems pretty committed to the idea. And this time, his argument was that the U.S. shouldn't have to defend Canada since they're both in NATO.
Okay.
And he also complained about Canada's trade practices and said that Canadians would probably have lower taxes if they were part of the U.S.
Interesting. So he's framing it as a win-win situation.
Yeah, like he's doing Canada a favor.
And what about China? Any developments with that relationship?
So President Trump said that he'd be talking to President Xi soon about possibly removing tariffs on Chinese goods, but he didn't give any specifics about when that call would happen. And he also kept blaming President Biden for the trade deficit with China.
So it sounds like the trade tensions with China are still very much alive.
Absolutely, front and center. And then there was one more thing that really stood out to me from that Friday.
Okay, what was that?
There was a report that President Trump believes he has the authority to round up and detain people without having to provide any evidence to the courts.
Wow, that's a pretty bold claim.
Yeah, he was quoted as saying, well, that's what the law says and the country needs. And then he went on to criticize President Biden's immigration policies.
So he's asserting a very expansive view of executive power.
It seems that way, which is definitely something to pay attention to.
So to sum it all up, this one Friday was like a microcosm of the administration's agenda.
I think you're right. You had national security colliding with business interest, big changes in domestic policy being announced, continuing tensions with key countries, and then these claims of significant executive authority.
It's almost overwhelming when you lay it all out like that.
It is a lot to take in. And throughout all of this, there are these inconsistencies, these unanswered questions. Like,
what?
Like, was there really a plan to brief Musk on these super-secret war plans? And if so, why deny it so forcefully?
Yeah, that's a good question.
And what's the real scope of Musk's role in this DOGE initiative? Is it just about efficiency, or is there more to it?
And how can you say you trust someone to help cut government costs while also expressing concerns about their loyalty because of their business dealings overseas?
Right. It just doesn't quite add up, and it really forces you to think critically about what's going on and what motivations might be at play.
So as we wrap up this deep dive, what would you say are the biggest takeaways from this whirlwind of news?
Okay, so first we had these conflicting reports about a possible briefing for Elon Musk on U.S. war plans with China, followed by these strong denials from the administration who are instead highlighting his work on government efficiency.
Right.
We also heard President Trump himself express worries about Musk's business ties to China as a potential security risk.
Uh-huh.
And all of this happened on the same day as big announcements about student loans, a new fighter jet immigration policy, Canada's relationship with the U.S., and the ongoing trade situation with China.
So it was a day packed with news.
It really was, and it all kind of blends together in a way that makes you think about the bigger picture.
I agree. So here's a question for you. Given that the administration is so focused on national security when it comes to China, but they're also relying on someone with major business interests there to improve government efficiency, what does that tell us about the relationship between the tech world and the government?
That's a really interesting question. It makes you wonder about how those two worlds are influencing each other.
And with all these major policy changes happening at once, what kind of long-term impact might we see across different areas of governments and society?
It's hard to say for sure, but it's definitely something to keep an eye on.
It is, and it highlights how important it is to be critical of the information we're getting from different sources and to think about the agendas that might be behind the stories we're hearing.
Absolutely well said. So keep asking questions, keep exploring, and thanks for joining us for this deep dive.
My pleasure.
Until next time.
See ya.